The following program is brought to you by grants from Forest City Ratner Companies, dedicated to a growing Brooklyn, an independent savings bank, 145 years of helping Brooklynites in their pursuit of happiness.
There's always been magic in this place, a strange enchantment that transforms groups of immigrants into a fiercely loyal community, and the place itself into the stuff of legend. A legend the entire world came to know as Brooklyn. The beginning was not especially promising. Lying in the long shadow of Manhattan, Brooklyn was forever the butt of jokes. A classic, as a doctor examining a young Army recruit.
Where are you from, son?
I'm from Brooklyn.
Any other disabilities?
Brooklyn is often misjudged by outsiders, and that's okay, because Brooklyn understands what makes it special and what ultimately made it famous. Its magic is in the character of its people and in the people who are its characters.
First of all, the names of people growing that I grew up with are remarkable. You always remember those names. There's Bucko. Bucko was a neighborhood person. There's Zeke. There's Ho-Ha, who used to speak of Ho-Ha. My name is Ho-Ha. And then there was a guy whose name was Gutter Rat. Gutter Rat, what kind of name is it? In fact, his mother would call him a gutter rat, time to come home for milk.
Brooklynites are wonderful, but you know, between the actual thing and the telling of it, they seem to color it with a little flavor.
Oh, boy, the street I lived on. I lived on a couple of streets in Brown, and I loved every minute of living there. I love Brooklyn. I love Brooklyn. If you notice, I start off with a contemporary Al Lewis hat, and that's a cowboy hat made for me by the best Western hat maker, Manny Gamage in Buda, Texas. So now, Manny, I have to tell you, I'm going to take this hat off. I'm going to cover up the intelligent questions that the guy wrote down, and I'll put on the old Brooklyn Dodger hat. How's that? Huh? Walter O'Malley, eat your heart out. Now, what were you saying?
For all its excesses, Brooklyn life has always had a very solid foundation, the neighborhood.
Bensonhurst was a family-oriented, God-fearing Jewish-Italian community. And people worked together and cried together and laughed together. And it was a hard-working community. There was very little snobbery that I recall.
My grandmother bought a house in Bed-Stuy. It was the second house she owned. She moved to Howard Avenue. And my mother took up one of the apartments in that house. And so we grew up with my grandmother always in the house, 3 generations. And I think most of my friends were 3-generation families, you know, something you don't see anymore.
Sheepshead Bay was a fantastic place to grow up. We had such wonderful times. Like when it snowed, we had all, my father would say, come on, everybody out, we're going to shovel the driveway and the sidewalk. We'd end up having a snowball fight.
There was something enriching here that bound most people and neighborhoods together. A sense that Brooklyn itself was a large, protective family. As Brooklynites, we were all in the struggle together, and we'd prevail together.
grandmothers knew grandmothers, no matter where they came from. They all swept the streets together. They all talked together. Fathers knew fathers. Everybody knew everybody else's kids. So you weren't able to do anything really naughty because somebody spotted you and your mother knew it within seconds, you know. So we were a real homogeneous kind of community.
I remember I once was running away from home, but I couldn't cross the street by myself. So the furthest I could go was come around the block, go to the Marlboro Theater, and there was like a board, like a show board that stood. I hid behind the show board. It's the story of my life for a while, and then I had to go home again.
My earliest memory was standing on a street watching the first paving of that block with the asphalt rollers going back and forth, smoothing the blacktop. I stood there with my brand new sneakers on, waiting for a moment to stamp down and leave my mark for posterity, when some woman walked by and said, "I know you and I know your mother, don't do it." This is how I was introduced to what civilization was all about.
If the block was an extended family, the local candy store was its community living room.
My home consisted of the back 3 rooms of a candy store, a little candy store, where toys and what they call egg creams, and you could buy Indian nuts. I used to have to sweep the floor in the store quite often of all the shells from the Indian nuts, because they bite it, spit it out, and then I'd clean them up.
No one had telephones, so the phone in the candy store was what was used by people. We kids would hang around. The owner would answer a phone and say, "Go call so-and-so to the telephone." And we would call them, and the typical tip was 2 cents. But one day, I was told to go call somebody to the telephone. And this guy came down, spoke on the phone after a while. When he came out, he says, "Who's the kid that called me?" He says, Me. And he went over and he handed me 25 cents. I nearly dropped dead. He says, "Mister, you gave me 25 cents. He says, "It's nothing. Get out of here." I says, "Who was that, Rockefeller?" He says, "No, that was Gura Shapiro, who was one of the main hitmen for Murder Incorporated."
Brooklyn people were mostly honest, hard-working folks, drawn from all over the world to this flashpoint of opportunity. Success here was not a gift, but a hard-earned prize, won by the efforts of determined men and women.
My dad worked 2 jobs in the beginning, you know, pushing delivery carts and working in a gas station at night, so it was very tough. And 7 of us, he always, remember him telling my mom, you know, "Evelyn, we may not be rich, but I always want enough food on the table for the children."
You gotta eat. You gotta pay the rent. You know, I was a plumber's helper. I sold toys in the old A&S in Brooklyn Christmas. I worked for the post office Christmas time. I was a messenger. I was a store detective for R.H. Mason. I had a million jobs. Well, you gotta eat. You gotta, you know, and I'm not embarrassed to say that. You know, some people say, "Don't say you were a plumber's helper." What do you do? I clean toilets. What do you mean, what did I do?
As the Great Depression took its toll, Brooklyn's houses of worship had more than sermons to deliver.
When people were in need, the church was a place you could come to, talking about for food, because they would let the membership know, take up an offering, and see that you got food. The same thing if you didn't have a place to stay. There'd be somebody that would open their home to you.
I remember dolls made out of clothespins. And I remember playing jacks, which cost nothing. And I remember sneaking after the Iceman's truck and getting slivers. So we didn't have ice cream. We had slivers of ice that we used to suck on.
Survival in Brooklyn was more than putting food on the table. It meant nourishing the spirit as well.
My father was out of work. He was looking for work, and he would have to go out in a cab and try to make a quarter. My mother would say, "Go out," and he says, "There's nobody using cabs anymore." And he'd come back with a quarter, and there were tears in his eyes, you But he always had enough money to take me to see a vaudeville show. And my mother resented that. She said, how could you, where do you get the money to go to a vaudeville show? And that's how I got turned on to being an actor.
During the Depression years, 29, 30, 31, I worked for my uncle, making $8 a week. And one day, someone heard me sing and gave me a job to sing at a wedding. And I got $5 plus dinner. I mean, that was, and I made $8 a week working for my uncle. I said, this is my racket.
Despite tough times, clever kids found ways to thrive on Brooklyn's streets.
When I got to be about 12, I got one of my first jobs as a delivery boy for a tuxedo and bridal gown rental shop on Stone Avenue. Now, in those days, Brooklyn had one of the most complex trolley car systems with free transfers from one point to the other. After several months, I mastered the system so well that I went out one day, made 13 deliveries. It took about 14 hours, and back to the store on the same nickel I started out with.
The trolley is not fast, but there were things you could do in a trolley you couldn't do anywhere else. First of all, the trolleys were open, and they had, you could stand on the side. You could stand and hang out, get your head knocked off sometimes by the girders from the overheads. But it was still such a pleasure to be in an open trolley.
There were so many trolleys on crowded Brooklyn streets, pedestrians became artful dodgers. In fact, Brooklyn was full of dodgers long before the baseball team claimed the name. Brooklyn's diverse groups needed a unifying symbol. They found it in their dodgers and developed an attachment so strong, it's hard to imagine these days. Brooklyn's patron saint of baseball, Charlie Ebbets, saved the Dodgers from moving to Baltimore. He built a quirky stadium right on Bedford Avenue. Ebbets Field became a shrine for the faithful.
Ebbets Field opened April 9th, 1913. First game at Ebbets Field, we lost 1-0 to the Philadelphia team. They won their first pennant in 1916, and they lost to the Boston Red Sox. And a young pitcher on that team, Babe Ruth, beat them in several games. The next pennant they won was in 1920, and they lost in 7 games. 5 games to 2 was a 9-game series at that time to the Cleveland Indians.
What the Dodgers seemed to dodge best was success. But the worse they were, the deeper fan support seemed to grow. The team was sarcastically known as Dem Bums, but only inside the Brooklyn family.
When I was a kid, I didn't think the Dodgers lost all the time. I thought they won all the time. I couldn't understand why they called them bums. I thought they were unbelievable. I thought it was marvelous. The Dodgers was wonderful.
People cared about them far more than seemed reasonable. Kids, especially, came under their spell. They dreamed of becoming bums.
My father, who was the baseball fan in the family, brought me up to be a Yankee fan. And he bought me a Yankee uniform, and he sent me out to play with the other kids, and they threw me in the mud.
We cleared a lot out, literally. We played sandlot baseball, and we cleared out the rocks and the old cans and the garbage, and set up a diamond, measured it out, and we played baseball there with beat-up baseball that one of us had swiped from Ebbets Field. Later on, we then went to play ball in the organized league. As we got older and a little better, those of us who were better, we played ball in the parade grounds.
As easily as a diamond could be discovered in a vacant lot, all of Brooklyn could become a wonderland of rich diversions. Prospect Park offered a little taste of the country.
We used to be able to go to a riding academy that was right outside the park, which is right around Coney Island Avenue, and we would rent horses, and you could ride through the park. You could ride all the way up Ocean Parkway on the bridle path to Coney Island.
If you knew how to ride, they'd let you take off on the horse, or somebody would go with you. I got a ticket once for galloping in Prospect Park. they pulled me over and actually gave me like a traffic ticket.
Prospect Park has a tremendous lake. We used to go there in the summertime. You could rent a boat and row around.
As the 30s came to a close, there was a feeling that the worst was over, that life in Brooklyn was good and getting better.
The seasons weren't just spring, summer, and fall, but there would be a ticket season to flip tickets. There'd be a marble season where we'd concentrate on now's the time for marbles. Then there's a time for tickets. There's a top season. We'd be playing with tops. Also a yo-yo season. The yo-yo season was also big because then we'd all have to get our equipment.
One of the fun things was going to the movies or the theater, and for a time we had vaudeville. And one of the best vaudeville houses in Brooklyn was the Flatbush Theater, which was on Flatbush near Church. And on this particular night, they had Louis Prima's band. Now, Louis Prima was a Brooklyn guy who was just coming into his prime. He was very dynamic, and he put on a great show. And it was just an exciting thing, and I was on a real high by the time the act was over, and then bang, the lights go out and the screen goes on. The first thing we see is this newsreel. And the newsreel focused on the Nazis' blitzkrieg invading Belgium.
The war was indeed in the newsreels, on the radio, and in the newspapers. But to most young Brooklynites, it might as well have been worlds away, lifetimes away. If only that were true.
Coney Island was our carnival, it was our amusement center, it was cheap. You'd go there for 10 cents on a train, spend all day on the beach.
The poor man's Riviera. It was a playground for the poor. I mean, who could go to Monte Carlo? Who could go to Virginia Beach?
Early on, when I was really young, they used to have these parades in Coney Island, and my grandmother used to take us to these things, and it was really special for us.
Coney Island allowed you to bend the rules. It was a way to let go, a way to let loose, and it was marvelous.
Coney Island was another world. Freak shows. I went to freak shows. The bearded woman, the thinnest man in the world, the greatest contortionist, magicians, sword swallowers, fire eaters. This was a new world for me.
Annie the Alligator Girl, Georgia Peach Twins, you know, the fat lady, you know, Indian Rubber Man, Popeye, the guy who used to pop his eye, was a friend of mine.
If we do have UFOs, if we do have space aliens coming from other planets, and we wonder, why do they make contact? They just come to smell them hot dogs. That's their whole reason to be here. They get that smell from Nathan's on Stewart Avenue. When my doctor says my cholesterol is 240, I know the only thing that'll bring it down is a hot dog from Nathan's.
Buying a hot dog at Nathan's for 7 cents was the thing. and the boardwalk picking up young ladies. I played a banjo and imitated Bing Crosby. When the blue of the night leaves the go, and I would get the girls. Now, the girls, we would get the girls, and they'd run off with my friends, and I was left alone with my, my banjo.
Summers in Brooklyn were brutally hot. Coney Island offered the surf and a sea breeze, relief within everybody's budget.
I could never get used to the beach because we didn't have money to buy a locker. So we always underdressed with a bathing suit. And we'd go out on the beach, take our clothes off surreptitiously, and then go in the water. Coming out, I always used to hate riding back on the subway to my home because my crotch was full of sand all the time. I hated that.
At day's end, the train or trolley brought Brooklynites home to those sweltering apartments. People stayed outside and talked to their neighbors, sat around on the stoop, or went up on the roof to keep cool. The sounds of kids playing in the streets echoed everywhere. In neighborhood bars and restaurants, Brooklynites drank locally brewed drafts, Rheingold, Peels, and Schaefer. People chatted about what local girl might win the honor of becoming Miss Rheingold or Miss Subway. A favorite evening ritual was reading the Brooklyn Eagle, the largest hometown paper in America. It gave neighborhoods reasons to be proud and united them in the larger glory of Brooklyn. The Eagle told readers what movies were playing, where to get the best deals on appliances, and how the bums managed to blow another ball game. At Ebbets, you were sure to get your money's worth, no matter who won the game. If it wasn't happening on the field, it was happening in the stands.
I worked Ebbetsfield, and in the summertime, ice cream is a big seller. I used to say, "You, get your ice cream, Pop. Here, I'll give your tongue a sleigh ride." And people used to laugh, and I'd sell the ice cream. I remember the Dodgers Symphony, and the lady with the cowbell, Hilda Chester, and my favorite umpire, Al Barlick. You'd sit in section 16, all the way in left field in the bleachers. And when he said, "Strike three!" Oh, everybody knew it.
If you play for DeRocher, you've got to have pepper and plenty of moxie.
How's that? Did you get that? It was a dandy if it had stuck in your glove. Talk about your civet. Feel I got one here.
After decades of failure, Dodger management finally built a team that could win.
Pete Reeser will be out on the field pulling him down, along with Dixie Walker, busy now divulging the secret of his success. Yes, sir, them bums is big news.
The 1941 Brooklyn Dodger pennant race, it was against the St. Louis Cardinals, and it was very exciting. Went down to the last minute. We had a terrific team. With Camille being the MVP and Reeser winning the batting championship, and Babe Herman hitting balls into right field, and Medwick hitting shots, and Dixie Walker playing right field, and we won the pennant, I think, by 2.5, 3 games.
The Subway Series was like Civil War, because in our neighborhood there were Yankee fans and there were Dodger fans.
The Yankees won the first 2 games of the 1941 World Series at the stadium. The Dodgers came back to take Game 3 at friendly Ebbets. Then it happened.
The Dodgers were winning 4-3 in Game 4. There were 2 out and 2 strikes on the hitter Tommy Hendrick. And pitcher Hugh Casey threw either a spitter or a wicked curve into the dirt. That was strike 3. Hendrick swung and then realized that the ball was at the backstop. He ran to first. And in a few minutes of thunder, the Yankees, DiMaggio, Keller, Gordon, Dickey, all got base hits, and the Dodgers were defeated 7-4.
Same old bums after all, still remarkable for their ability to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Later, in autumn of '41, Brooklynites gathered for another intercity grudge match. This time between the New York Giants and Brooklyn Dodger football teams.
I'd never seen a big league football game, and my father promised he would take me, so as it happened, I got the measles. I mean, I really got the measles, and I was out. There was no way I was going to the game. So I stayed home, and it was a very crisp, cold afternoon, and I was listening to the game on the radio. It was a very exciting game.
All of a sudden, an announcement came out that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. We couldn't believe it. We were stunned. If I recall correctly, they would go back to the game, and then they'd come back. And before you know it, there wasn't more game on. Radio was all news flashes and reports.
I remember the panic. They thought that the Japanese were landing in Coney Island. And I remember my mother, who wasn't a drinker, but going to a bottle of whiskey, Old Overhauled, great name, and putting it up to her lips and drinking it. She was so scared.
There were also rumors about German submarines off Coney Island, and of course we couldn't go swimming if there were German submarines. We'd bump into them, maybe even sink a couple.
What they did in World War II, they put up a gigantic net from Staten Island to Brooklyn to catch any subs that were coming in.
There was a tremendous amount of propaganda, too, at the time that had us all crazy. I mean, the great mantra of the war was loose lips, sink ships. And this was everywhere. And my father worked in a war plant in Bush Terminal during the war at night. So he was particularly sensitive to it, as were the rest of us. You know, the saboteur was a figure lurking around in the shadows somewhere in our imaginations.
Apart from the knowledge that, you know, the war was a terrible, terrible thing, the ambiance of Brooklyn was fantastic. First of all, the spirit. I mean, if there were warring factions among Jews and Gentiles, among Irish and Italian and Poles and God knows what, they disappeared. I mean, it was like everything came together. Everybody was fighting for the cause.
By the tens of thousands, Brooklyn's young men enlisted, kissed their girls, had a last beer at the corner bar, waved a final goodbye to the neighbors, and went off to war.
I remember my brother was drafted. He went to Fort Dix, and I was his older sister, very protective. And I took the bus to Fort Dix. I was determined to save my brother and went to the barracks. I found where his barracks was, and I was outraged. I said, they don't have any doors between the toilets. I mean, this is outrageous, and went back to this leatherneck sergeant and registered my complaint. And let me tell you.
I had a friend named Bernie, and when I knew him, he was just a young, you know, he was nice and everything. And one day he came over and he said, I got my notice, I have to report. And he says, you promise you're going to write to me and everything? Oh, that was the first time I wrote to a serviceman. I didn't know what to write. It was such a new and exciting thing. I told him about the changing of the leaves. I told him what I ate. I told him how we missed him. I told him how things are, you know, in the street, and that I rode my bicycle. I didn't know what. And then lo and behold, the second one I wrote to was Pete. Pete was a Marine. And then gradually you started, it was kind of awkward. You met more and more people, men going into the service. And it escalated. And with the escalation, I grew older and more understanding of what it was all about.
Everybody in Brooklyn was working to help win the war. Patriotism was simply a more intense expression of loyalty as far as Brooklynites were concerned.
During the war, the women were able to replace a lot of the men. The women were driving garbage trucks to pick up the garbage. They were driving buses and trolley cars. They worked as riveters. They worked in the Navy Yard.
At the height of the war, 70,000 people worked tirelessly at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. 6,000 of them were women. A typical silent heroine was Alberta Day, who had one day off every 3 weeks. The facility, known as the Can-Do Yard, ran 24 hours a day, building everything from LSTs to aircraft carriers. The work was extremely hazardous. For every great ship launched, more than a dozen workers perished in job site accidents, uncounted casualties of war.
We would hear things about ships being made and sailing out of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And we would stand up very proudly because this was Brooklyn Navy Yard, and we were making a great effort to win the war.
I'll never forget the first time they decided that perhaps we could be bombed. And they put the air raid sirens on. I lived near Church Avenue, and believe it or not, I slept through the first air raid siren.
Wake up, Miss America. Wake up, Mrs. America. Friendly planes may not always cast their moving shadow on you, but planes loaded with evil men and death. It still can happen here.
When the air raid siren would come on, you were supposed to immediately make sure that no light was escaping from your premises.
I remember that. The older people who volunteered with the hats. Put the light out! Put that light out!
The war itself in Brooklyn was a very strange, peculiar time because most of the men were gone. So there were women everywhere and kids that had been left behind.
During the war, the schools and the churches worked together. We had what you call a victory garden. And I was in the 5th grade. And St. Francis was right across from PS 23, you know. And every day we'd take a walk down to a victory garden, which was on the church grounds. And they taught us to grow food for ourselves. The milk, the butter, the cheese, and other foods of that type were rationed, and you only could buy a certain amount each day. We did what we had to do to support the war.
We've had dozens of letters from Brooklyn boys, Navy and Army. All of them are convinced that by request would give them and the rest of the men in the service the biggest break of the war if we just show some shots of their very special hometown.
Okay, Mac, here we go. A quick tour of Brooklyn, beginning with the famous bridge, looking at it from Lower Manhattan. Then into the downtown district. Several requests came in for this shot of Fulton Street, so here it is. This shot of Henry Street is for Vincent Guaranciano, somewhere in France. Corporal John Meyer, out of the States now for over 2 years, reminds us that Brooklyn is sometimes called the city of churches. Asks to see St. Teresa's, his parish church. Says it'd give him and 2,500 other Teresians in the service a lot of pleasure. And here's a shot of Shore Road for Sergeant Lester Rodney. And several others who wrote in saying a glimpse of it and the bay would help take care of that homesick feeling.
When it came to supporting their guys in the service, Brooklyn gals always rose to the occasion.
I had 2 friends that we used to go down. We volunteered to dance with the fellas at the USO. And there were strict rules. You could dance with them. You could talk to them because some of them were away from home and they were very lonesome. But you could not date them.
They would tell you that they're from Brooklyn and a different part of Brooklyn or something. And occasionally you get somebody from Idaho or you get somebody from, you know, a different part of the country. And they were wonderful too. I mean, not as wonderful as Brooklynites, but also wonderful.
News of our fighting men came home on the pages of the Eagle. To keep morale high, victories were splashed on the front page. Casualties were more discreetly placed. By the summer of '45, thousands of Brooklyn windows were flecked with gold.
These people who were young people, 18 and 19 or 20, they weren't going to leave their home until they got married and only to move upstairs. people that leave, and to have them pass away, to die at that stage, that young, was the ultimate tragedy. And those who lived, you know, came back with this. They never were the same.
Back to the American home, with welcome and well done everywhere.
When the young people came back from the war, they were not youngsters anymore. They had gained in a short period of time worldly experience. They had been under the gun. They had faced death in some cases. They had matured extraordinarily in a short period of time. They were coming back to make up for lost time.
These are people whose little local hamlet in Brooklyn was maybe 10 blocks by 5 blocks. And suddenly they were marching through Paris on the day it was liberated. You know, they were different. They had brought back with them a different sense of the world and of the possibilities of the world.
Returning veterans found Brooklyn full of possibilities, even as the wartime economy was winding down and some jobs were in short supply. Vets took advantage of the GI Bill in huge numbers. Brooklyn College was filled to overflowing with first-generation college students.
And the big feeling was in World War II that people missed each other, families were broken up, people wanted to have the American dream then, the home in Long Island.
Many of the young veterans and their new families did leave for places with very un-Brooklyn-sounding names: Syosset, Levittown, Massapequa. But a great many others remained faithful to the old neighborhood. Loyalty was a Brooklyn virtue, fostered early and reinforced throughout the school years.
Erasmus Hall, thy colors bright, with every breeze unfurled, our stars by hues of purple light, of blue against the world.
Here's to our old alma mater, here's to the school we love. Oh, Bensonhurst, dear Bensonhurst, to you will all be true. We will revere your memory, dear, and keep our faith with you.
Firm based on rock foundation.
Oh, God.
Our colors
Bright
brightly
and
shine. For we honor thee
I
and
remember.
love thee. Hooray
For 99. Woody Allen's alma mater. I don't.
One of the best things about Lincoln was that it really couldn't be pretentious. I mean, its nickname was Stinkin' Lincoln, and with that kind of a name, how could you really, have airs about yourself? You couldn't.
They were very good schools. The teachers, the instructors had a great concern about their pupil. They made us learn, really. They were concerned. We did homework, and they checked our homework.
For the first time in my school days when I started high school, I could not come home for lunch. And that was kind of strange. We all had to, the freshmen all had to stay and have lunch in the cafeteria. You weren't allowed to leave. And that was strange to me because my mother had this great meal every day prepared for us, I had pasta fagioli and I just had meatballs, and that kind of stuff. But now here I am in high school and I'm eating cafeteria food. I mean, that was quite an adjustment we had to make.
Kids escaped the tyranny of school lunchrooms for places like Dubrow's, where they could mingle with the sophisticated college crowd over an egg cream and a cheeseburger deluxe.
High school was very exciting. Each neighborhood had its own high school, and the high school sort of defined who you hung out with, what you did, where you went to the beach at Brighton Beach, what diners you hung out at night. Whatever parish or high school you attended, that was your group.
When we used to go to the dances, we'd ask a girl what parish you're from. And frankly, the reason for it being is that if she lived in a far-out parish, say OLPH, and you're sitting in there at a dance at St. Augustine's, you knew that you had a long bus ride to go home, take her home. If she was from Ridgewood, which was all German, and she happened to be in visiting somebody, it was a whale of a ride home. So normally, before you asked a girl if you could take her home, you found out what parish she was from.
Romance in Brooklyn was an interesting thing. You were always afraid to push too far.
And the girls, we went crazy. You know, we'd walk down the street, and from your heart, the little beats, and then oh.
Barely, maybe I touched her hair. I touched her shoulder.
Be still my heart. It was excitement unbelievable.
There was no sex. There was no sex in Brooklyn. I don't care what anybody tells me. There was even sex after they got married, for crying out loud. They all lived in the same house. There was very little, there was, and here I am. Of all the revolutions to miss out on, I missed out on the sexual revolution.
The Gowanus Canal might not have been quite as romantic as the left bank, but amorous couples in Brooklyn could still find places to be in love and to amuse themselves.
I went on a date to, let's say, Lundy's in Sheepshead Bay. Now, when you went into Lundy's at Sheepshead Bay, I mean, that was a fish house. You couldn't sit down to eat. That everybody, well, not everybody, but almost everybody there was a friend of yours.
Nightlife pulsed with rhythm, as stimulating as Brooklyn itself. Clubs all over the borough presented marvelous music in every possible style.
And not every week the place will be jam-packed, and in many of the social clubs, new people will come in, and sometimes what happens is you'll find friends. In my case, I was very young in those days. My friends will say, are you going to the club this week? I say, yes.
The mecca of Brooklyn night spots was Ben Maxick's Town and Country on Flatbush Avenue.
I worked in Ben Maxick's Town and Country, and only worked there in the summer, and I was still in high school. And I got paid a big pitcher of root beer and roast beef sandwiches for me and my friends to do 2 shows a night, only on Friday, with the Monk Herbert Trio.
Of course, Buddy was very proud to work our club. We had about a 700 or 800 seater club in those days, and we were like the next stop before the Copacabana.
When the Town and Country wasn't presenting comics and crooners, it became the chic place for tying the knot.
When the new club opened up, we did as many as 26 weddings simultaneously. And we had a marrying Sam operation going on upstairs. Every 10 minutes, we married someone. I just recall one day in which the minister was saying, "And now I pronounce you Milton Berle." There was some sort of a mix-up between the show going on downstairs, and I'll never forget that because everyone was hysterical.
The great thing about Brooklyn is everybody married everybody. Jews married Goyim, Italians married Irish, everybody moved, usually not from the same neighborhood. I mean, the joke was that, you know, the only place an Irish guy could get a girl was in the Italian neighborhood. The only way the Italian guys could get women was in the Irish neighborhoods. There was a lot of moving around and shifting.
After the war, Brooklyn gave rise to a new generation and a new way of doing things.
My mother, in 1947, decided that she was going to be a real American and bake a Betty Crocker instant apple pie. And my grandmother, she thought my mother was going to poison our family. She was convinced that this was the end of our life. She was also, I mean, she was holding on to Italy. And my mother, with this great show of independence and saying, I want to make this Betty Crocker apple pie, this was a direct challenge. And there was a big fight, and my mother prevailed. She baked that Betty Crocker apple pie, and my grandmother wouldn't even watch us eat it. She wouldn't look. She cursed that apple pie. The entire family got deathly ill. I mean, we were just, everybody was heaving at the same. It was just horrible.
We were fortunate in one way that we were, in fact, growing up in a brand new world post-war. And unfortunate in another way that the things we were learning about our country, our parents didn't seem to know about. So that was like the beginning of the change in Brooklyn in terms of generationally, the people before the war and the people after the war, which was us.
No one in Brooklyn embodied that change more than Jackie Robinson. Signed to a major league contract by General Manager Branch Rickey in 1947, Robinson stepped into a Dodger uniform and American history at the same moment. The color barrier was smashed in Brooklyn.
It was just thrilling when Jackie Robinson came to the Dodgers. He was a great ball player. He was fun to watch. Once he got on the base paths, he electrified the stadium. And it was just wonderful. And there was a camaraderie in the park anyhow. The fans loved him. They loved the team.
With the help of Robinson and those other remarkable boys of summer, the Dodgers won a string of pennants in 1947, 49, 52, and 53. Pennants, yes, but never that elusive World Series. There was a suspicion in Brooklyn, the city of churches, that perhaps God really was a Yankee fan.
Yes, sir, the Yankees did it. 5 straight World Series. Here are the highlights. Game 2.
The thing that was absolutely certain was that the Yankees would beat the Dodgers in the World Series. They had done it so many times. They had gone to 6 games and 7 games. Even in seasons in which the Dodgers had a better record, better hitters, sometimes better pitchers, the Yankees would find a way to beat them in a World Series. So in 1955, when the Yankees and Dodgers got to the 7th game of the World Series, even in Brooklyn, no one really doubted the Yankees would win. Now, people in Brooklyn will tell you something different, but they all thought the Yankees would win.
It was a 23-year-old lefty named Johnny Padres who proved to be the difference, along with a miracle catch in left field.
So when Johnny Padres shut out the Yankees and the game ended 2-0 with the Dodgers winning, Brooklyn was as shocked as the rest of the world that the Dodgers finally beat the Yankees.
Our bums, the Dodgers, beat the Yankees. And Sandy Ambrose made that catch in left field and doubled them up. And I was there in that series. I went to 4 games, and those were the 4 they won.
The Dodgers win it 2-0 and win their first World Series. They were out-hit by a gallant Yankee team, but never outplayed, and this day will live long in the memory of Brooklyn, USA.
Oh, how sweet it was. The parade down Flatbush Avenue. All those years of frustration erupting in a great show of affection for those once beleaguered, always beloved, and now triumphant bums. The satisfaction of Brooklynites was short-lived, however. 2 years later, Dodger owner Walter O'Malley plunged a dagger into the heart of the borough when he announced that he was moving the Dodgers out of Brooklyn. O'Malley had negotiated a secret sweetheart deal to have a stadium built in the Chavez Ravine, promising to build community facilities for displaced Los Angeles citizens. Brooklyn fans, the best in baseball, had been betrayed. Now they could truly say, we was robbed.
Go out there now and see what he built. Nothing. Zip. The center of a bagel. That's what he built. Oh, it was a carpetbagger, Walter. That's all he was. And he took advantage, and he betrayed all of the Brooklynites. And we will never forgive him. Never. And one day, I don't care if he went up or down after he demised, I will catch up with him, and I'll let him know it.
The loss of the Dodgers was a body blow, and not the only one. By the end of the 50s, many families had been lured away by the enticements of suburbia. The last of Brooklyn's trolleys had been pulled off the tracks. And the hometown paper, the Brooklyn Eagle, shut down the presses for good. In the eyes of many, it was the end of an era, but it was most assuredly not the end of Brooklyn. Brooklyn renewed itself, as it always had, with remarkable people, with a new generation of immigrants.
Immigrant energy is what really made New York. If you see all the periods of great sudden, apparently sudden advance, it's been preceded by the immigrants. People came off those boats with suitcases tied together with rope, and they came across the ocean. They had their eyes examined in Ellis Island, and they were humiliated and laughed at and joked about, and they came across the street and they built America.
We had waves of immigrants coming from Europe, Eastern Europe. And then following that, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, we had the African Americans coming here, as well as the Hispanics. And just recently, we've had waves of immigrants coming from the Caribbean, from Russia, and from Asia.
Brooklyn is home to people of 93 distinct ethnic groups. Now, if you go within that, and you speak about the African American community, we have people here who are speaking Creole, Haitian, French, Papiamento, Ga and Twi, directly from Africa, who did not have this experience here. They're speaking Spanish, Portuguese, so many languages.
It's really wonderful to see. I love going shopping in the neighborhood and talking with all the shopkeepers and all their different accents and their different backgrounds.
I think Brooklyn represents the spirit of New York City. Brooklyn is seen as a place, and the Dodgers sort of typified that, of the underdog who can win against all odds. And I think Brooklyn evokes that sort of feeling in people.
It is not only the influx of new populations with will and talent that is renewing Brooklyn. Many of the old ties still bind, and people in search of time-honored Brooklyn values are coming home once again.
I never say I'm from New York. I always say I'm from Brooklyn, because I consider Brooklyn a separate entity, and I always feel that we were a city within the city, not just any other borough. We were the most special place on earth, and if you don't like it, do me something, but that's how I feel about Brooklyn.
I had chances to leave if I had wanted, to leave, I would have, but I didn't want to go. I want to stay here and be a part of what's happening here.
Brooklyn is about to go through its turn, and I say what I mean is that it is going through its entire cycle. It's now back to the beginning, and I think that means a worth, that it has worth, and that the people who live there now, or the people who still own their homes there now, remember that worth to the point where they made an effort to bring it back.
It's really important not to deny the roots, and we really need roots. So to really appreciate it, I guess I had to move away to really appreciate where I come from.
The beginning of a movement in Brooklyn's unfinished symphony is being sung by a rich, diverse choir. It is music as old and as new as Brooklyn, varied, vital, and as always, full of hope.
I remember all the good things and of growing up and living there with my children being born there and everything. I love Brooklyn. And you'll never forget it. In my mind, it still looks the same.
It was a wonderful time growing up. It was a time when water was clean and sex was dirty.
get very nostalgic about your youth, about the terrific times I spent as a young man in Brooklyn, about the terrific people who lived in Brooklyn. And mostly, I'm resting on about a 60-foot mattress of wonderful, warm memories of having lived in Brooklyn. And I'm too comfortable to get off.
Down the beach from Coney, you could enjoy a quieter day by the sea.
After my husband left, and he was gone for 2.5 years, all of the girls used to hang out together. One of the things that we used to do, the girls who were left at home, would be to go to Rockaway Beach. I sent a lot of what we used to call cheesecake pictures to my husband, who was overseas. I wanted to make sure that he remembered me.
Over the years, the Rockaways grew into a summer bungalow community.
We lived in Washington Heights, where it was hot and dark and ugly, and most years we were taken out of school around the 15th of June, and we headed straight for the beach. Once we reached the Rockaways, you could park the car and just go everywhere on foot. We had 2 bungalows back to back. The front bungalow was my aunt, my Aunt Evelyn, my Uncle Ben, and 2 kids, and my grandparents. We lived in the back bungalow, myself, my sister, and my brother, and my parents. In between the 2 bungalows was a courtyard, and in the courtyard was where life happened.
My kids had to have the beach because I had it when I was a kid and they needed it too.
Besides, it was cheaper than sending the 3 kids to camp like I would have to do.
Main reason we didn't go to the country was because our husbands were working. And living at the beach, they could come home every night.
All men that came home from work that night had a towel, got into their shorts, and they went in for a dip in the ocean. And it just sort of, am I right, Al?
Right.
Am I right?
You became more relaxed.
That's right.
We went to the beach every day, unless it rained.
In the afternoon, card games provided a little friendly competition. Pinochle for the guys and canasta or mahjong for the ladies. And dinners were always memorable.
My mother made
Kashavanitchkas,
yeah,
roast beef,
gedämpfte Fleisch,
roast chicken, brisket. Those were all, and Mom did
And
all the
latkes.
cook. But her greatest meals were Sunday afternoon when my uncle went fishing and brought home flounders.
Early evenings were spent with friends on the boardwalk or just pedaling through the neighborhood.
We made our own entertainment. We had a television, but we rarely watched it. On the weekends, relatives would come out, and there was always somebody who sang or played an instrument.
Labor Day was a special day out at the beach. Everybody, every house in every corner, there were block parties. You were saying so long to your neighbors. Even sometimes you said, well, I want to stay an extra couple of days.
And you didn't
Labor
stay.
Day night, you looked out the street, all the lights were out. It was dead. You just, come on, let's pack up and get the hell out of here.
When I was about 5 years old, I remember being fascinated by fire engines. As a matter of fact, I used to hang out outside a firehouse every once in a while and watch the fire engines go out. And then there's the hook and ladder went out of the firehouse. The guy in the caboose would always take his hat and hit a little pipe, and the doors would close. And I always said, gee, how do those firemen get to where they have to go to? And one day, my mother was pushing the carriage on South 5th Street My brother was in the carriage, and my sister was alongside, and I saw this firebox, and I just reached up, and I decided to pull the alarm, and suddenly I heard the sound, clank, 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 and my mother said, "Why did you do that?" I said, "I don't know, I just wanted to do it." She says, "Come on, let's get out of here," and she started pushing the carriage down the street, and a woman was watching, a woman with like yellow hair, and she started screaming, "He pulled in a fire alarm! I saw him! He pulled in an alarm!" She said, "Shut up, lady!" And she just, come on, keep on. And she kept pushing us up the street. She says, "He pulled in an alarm!" She started, "He pulled in an alarm! The kid pulled in an alarm!" And finally, my mother looked at her when we got to the door of our house and said, "Shut up, lady! He didn't do a thing! You're a liar! You're a damn liar!" Got into the house, and she says, "Why'd you do that?" I says, I don't know why." She says, "Well, get in the bed, go to sleep." I took off my clothes, I got into bed, and I was lying in bed, and I started getting very crazed. I heard fire engines going by, and I said, "Gee," what would happen if somebody was, firemen, if they were killed while I was doing this? And she says, "Your father's going to have to talk to you about this thing." And I said, "Never happen again, never happen again." My father came home, and she said, "You know, he pulled in an alarm." And my father said, "He pulled in an alarm?" She says, "Is that all you can say? He pulled in an alarm?" He says, well, looked at me and says, "Why did you pull the alarm?" I said, "I don't know, I just pulled in the alarm." She says, "Is that all you're going to do?" He said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" He says, "You spoil him. You never hit him. You never do anything. Look at this." She says, "What do you want me to do?" She said, "Give him the strap." So he said, "Okay, come on." He took me out of the bed, led me to the room. I was in the other room. He says, took off the strap from his belt, and he said, "Okay, scream." And he doubled up the strap, and he made a snap. "Ah!" And I went, "Ah!" He doubled it again. "Ah!" He says, "Louder." And then, "Ah!" He says, "Okay. Will you ever do it again?" I says, "No, never again." "Okay, go back in the room." Went back. My mother says, "Well, did you hit him?" He says, "I gave it to him good." My mother looked at me. She says, "Did he hurt you?"
It's pure, solid cheesecake. And the best ingredients are in it. We bake it very slowly. It's a serious cheesecake for a serious, pure cheesecake lover.
How many cheesecakes do you think you've sold?
Oh my goodness, I really couldn't say. Oh my God, it could be millions in the last 35 years. But they are the best.
All right. You have cheesecake for dessert today? Good. What kind did you have? Strawberry?
Strawberry cheese.
Strawberry cheese. Okay. My father started in 1929 with a restaurant called the Zero. Then in 1945, we changed it to Junior's, and we concocted this cheesecake mix and kept changing it until we got it right. We make strawberry cheese, pineapple cheese, cherry cheese, blueberry cheese, Black Forest, marble cheesecake, plus some other varieties.
Very good. Delicious.
I love the cheesecake, yes. Very good, very tasty.
What's your favorite kind of cheesecake?
The chocolate cheesecake, which is behind me.
I am 92 years of age. I've been coming to Junior's restaurant for 29 years. Because once you try it, you'll come back and ask for more.
Well, first of all, 16th Avenue wasn't paved, but there was streetcar tracks. And well, for me, I was a little kid, so it seemed like the ditches were very deep when you had to step over the rail to cross over. Then catty corner from the little apartment house we lived was a big vacant lot and then some small houses, and then it went up the street to the subway ditch, which was where the Sea Beach trains went. And on that empty field, people had sheep. There were some sheep. Then if you got on the streetcar, which was 3 cents, and went to Coney Island, you passed farms and farms through Cropsey Avenue and places like that. After a little ride, there were farms and breezes and no tall buildings to stop the air in the summertime. Hitting through the open windows of the streetcar was a wonderful feeling. Cost 3 cents, though.
We made a trip to Coney Island every summer, at least one, and we'd spend the whole day in Coney Island. It was a delight. We looked forward to it. After a full day playing on the rides and everything, then we go to Nathan's.
When I was about 5 years old, my father used to take us down here on Sunday afternoon after church. We used to line up for Franks and French fries. I believe they were a nickel, and they went up to a dime. I can remember my father complaining. On Friday nights after we went out, we'd always come past Nathan's and chow down on 2 or 3 hamburgers and hot dogs all the time.
When I was a kid, I didn't even know what Nathan's was. All I know is that my father would go to work, and I didn't see him in the morning, and I didn't see him until later at night. And after a little bit older, all I wanted to do was to come for my birthday parties. And I'd have the privilege of bringing like 5 or 6 friends. We'd come in, have lunch, and then go on the rides, which sometimes was a mistake. You go on a roller coaster after you just ate lunch, not such a good idea. My grandfather, Nathan Hamworker, was a roll cutter at Feltman's, which was a famous beer garden. And Jimmy Durante was a singer there, and Eddie Cantor. And they told my grandfather, Nathan, why don't you, Feltman's is selling Frankfurters for a dime, why don't you open up a place and sell a Frankfurter for a nickel? And the story goes, he took their advice, and they took their life savings, my grandfather and my grandmother, and invested $300 into a little corner hot dog stand. And we opened the first store in Coney Island, right on the corner of Surf and Stillwell.
You can't get a hot dog, a Nathan's hot dog, you can't get anywhere else in the world except at this Nathan's. There's something about the hot dog at this Nathan's. You can go all the franchises any way you want. It's not like eating a hot dog at Coney Island Nathan's.
My grandfather was concerned because people were walking by the restaurant because they couldn't understand how Feltman's would sell a Frankfurter for a dime and Nathan's was selling it for a nickel. There had to be something wrong with the product. So what he did was he went down to Coney Island Hospital. He saw doctors wearing their white coats and their stethoscopes, and he borrowed some of those coats and stethoscopes and put people in the coats and stethoscopes, and the people said, hey, if it's good enough for a doctor, it's good enough for me. The favorite tradition at Nathan's is the annual 4th of July hot dog eating contest. And you are able to eat as many hot dogs as you can in 12 minutes. And you have a choice of whatever drink you would like to. It's just a lot of fun. The winner gets a big trophy and a year's supply of hot dogs. Last year, the winner had eaten 21 and a half Frankfurters. That's a lot of hot dogs. It's the hot dog and the bun. That's one of the rules. You know, you can't take the bun off. You have to eat with the roll. You could put anything you want on it, but most people just take the Frankfurter, and well, they have many different styles. I mean, some squish 2 together, some dip it in water. I mean, it's a sight to behold.
And then we went to school. Well, that was something. We had to go 10 blocks one way, 6 blocks another way, and we had to pass Ebinger's Bakery. Motto, the fragrance. it enveloped you and tingled your spine. And all of a sudden, the salivary glands began to work, and you knew you shouldn't do it, but boy, you couldn't wait for lunch because you're going to go to Ebenezer's Bakery and eat and eat and eat. It was delicious.
We had food that no one else had. We had, Ebenezer's Bakery, which was probably the height of Western civilization. We've decayed as a civilization when we let Ebenezer's go. And they had, unique things, a blackout cake, Othello's, which is as close as I got to Shakespeare.
One of the best playgrounds was just a subway ride away. Coney Island's amusement park owners didn't fret much about the closing of the World's Fair. Except for the period during the war, attendance had been growing and growing.
The reward would come on weekends, Saturdays especially. Folks would give us $1.50, we'd go to Coney Island. Now this was an emotion. Coney Island was an emotion. It wasn't just a place. It was part of our bodies. It was part of growing up. I mean, my entire boyhood was spent weekends at Coney Island.
Children who lived in the surrounding neighborhoods never seemed to tire of the attractions. Even those kids visiting Coney under the watchful eyes of parents returned home with tales of adventure and daring. When it came to escaping city life for a while, no other place offered such exciting variety.
There were 3 groups that actually went to Coney Island. There were the beach people that went to the sand, went swimming. There were the boardwalk people, and there were the amusement people. And usually those 3 groups didn't mix at all.
The beaches from those days, you almost had to stand. There wasn't enough room to sit down. But we loved it.
On the boardwalk, hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers reached into their pockets, wallets, and handbags for money to buy tickets and treats.
Underneath the boardwalk was sometimes a gold mine because people would drop things, drop jewelry, bills, and of course you find $1 bill, and that's enough to take you a whole day through Coney Island.
As a teenager growing up, we used to go there sometimes instead of going to school, spending a day at Steeplechase Park and going around the barrels and the slide, and then of course the horses that ran around the outside of the building.
Steeplechase was an amazing assortment of rides, practical jokes, and entertainment. The Lifesaver Candy Company had built the parachute jump at the World's Fair. It was such a hit that George Tillieu had it taken down and moved to Steeplechase Park.
There's nothing higher in the world than the parachute and the fright and the fear. And that's something that will never, ever leave anybody who's been on that parachute ride with that little metal seat, with that little, I think it was a bakery string they used to tie around you. That's what it seems like. Nothing was holding you on but fear, and just you held on to this thing. And I remember hitting the top and then going down, and the whole world was beneath your feet.
There were so many different forms of entertainment at Steeplechase that even the little clown from the Blowhole Theater had more than one job. The yearly beauty pageant drew thousands of contestants. The young and the not-so-young competed for the coveted title of Miss Modern Venus.
Coney Island was a very important part of my growing up, socially, sexually. It was really, it was sort of a license to touch skin because you were protecting somebody.
The love affair between the people of Brooklyn and the Brooklyn Dodgers was a once-in-a-lifetime thing to happen. And it was wonderful to actually be part of it, even if I was on the other end of it as a Yankee fan. I'd never seen that kind of relationship between a ball team and its fans. I remember many years later, Warren Spahn, who was the great first Boston Brave pitcher, and then when Boston moved on to Milwaukee and eventually Atlanta, but he pitched mostly for the Boston Braves in those days. Warren Spahn used to say that the place that he dreaded pitching the most was Ebbets Field, because the fans would start yelling and screaming as they were coming into the ballpark and buying their tickets. When they actually got into the seats, they would make you feel like a pitcher, that you couldn't physically emerge from that stadium alive if you beat the Dodgers. They'd be in your face, yelling and screaming. And it really was the most exciting and excitable ballpark in the history of baseball.
In New York City, the powerful combination of radio and newspapers influenced most people's attitudes about many things. But the home team radio announcers and the local sports pages pushed the already bitter baseball rivalries to a new ferocity. Everybody had a fierce loyalty to one of the three teams and hatred of the other two. No city before or since has been able to support three major league teams. Brooklyn had the Dodgers, Manhattan the Giants, and the Yankees were the Bronx Bombers. During the regular season, the most bitter rivalry was between the National League Giants and Dodgers. They and their fans would take turns tormenting each other. The enmity ran so deep that when Jackie Robinson was traded from the Dodgers to the Giants in 1956, he simply refused to go. When the Dodgers lost the World Series to the Yankees, as they usually did, a million Brooklynites would mutter, "We was robbed," and wait till next year.
The rivalry between the Dodgers and the Giants, and then between the Dodgers and the Yankees, was awesome. It was like something you cannot believe. And we as fans in Brooklyn felt we were better to the extent that we were more knowledgeable about the team and about baseball. Obviously, we weren't any brighter than people living in the Bronx, but that was our perception. We were better fans because no matter what the Dodgers did, we were behind them 100%.
So we'd walk all the way to the ballpark and walk all the way back, right across Prospect Park. And we thought that would go on forever. You know, we thought it would go on forever. We thought it was a period where the three of the greatest teams of baseball were all in New York.
In schoolyards, workplaces, and taverns throughout the city, debates raged over which team had the better players. Was it Reese or Rizzuto, Berra or Campanella, Willie, Mickey, or the Duke? You were born a Dodger, a Giant, or a Yankee fan, and usually you died that way. The Dodgers, nicknamed Dem Bums, were the soul and spirit of Brooklyn and expressed the deepest needs and desires of their fans. Like Brooklyn itself, the Dodgers were the most human and quirky of teams.
We used to pay 60 cents to go to a ball game, $2.50 maybe for the box seats. But then one day, this bunch of fellas came in with musical instruments, and they were thrown out of the ballpark. They had the bass drum, you know, trumpet and everything, and my brother Shorty got them back in. And he made them come under his section there, section 8. They couldn't read music, and they just made noise, and Shorty would lead the band, and also with little Jojo D'Elia, they would get up and start jitterbugging. They'd have a top hat on and a tuxedo on. They looked like bums. The fans loved them. That's how the symphony was born down there.
And they would get on the umpires and the opposing players, and they would generally create an atmosphere of goodwill. Another aspect would be Happy Felton's Knothole Gang, which before each home game, Happy down the right field line by the bullpen would try out 3 ball players at the same position, 3 children from a high school or Little League, and he'd have one of the Dodgers come and select the one that showed the most talent. Abe Stark had a clothing store, and to advertise the store, he put a sign out there, hit this sign and win a suit. And he made a deal with Carl Furillo, the greatest fielding right fielder that ever lived. If he prevented the opposing ball players from hitting the sign, Abe would in turn give Carl a suit or 2.
I must tell you this story. The Queen Mother of England came to New York. They did a painting of her Canadian club in New York, and I was asked to sing the anthems, Canadian, English, and American anthem, and I did, as they unveiled this portrait of the Queen Mother. After it was over, she says, where are you from? I said, Brooklyn. Oh, Brooklyn. I've heard so much about it. And she turned to an aide. She says, I must see Brooklyn before I leave. Would you take me? Well, it happened. She did go, and I saw it 2 days later in the paper, the front page of the paper. Queen Mother of England visits Brooklyn for the first time, and I had pictures of her in Brooklyn, and I was responsible for it. It shows you the power of Brooklyn. It's another country. Brooklyn, in Europe, Brooklyn is a country. It's not a borough. Listening to the bird up in a tree singing, and two Brooklyn kids. One says, hey, listen to that boy chirping. He said, it ain't a bird, it's a bird. Yeah, but he's still chirping. Did you get it?
Movies. Now, in the early movies, these are silent movies, no sound. This is in the early 20s. People used to sit in there, and the place began to smell. I'll never forget what used to happen. The man would, you know what a flit gun is? It's a spray against mosquitoes and things. They used to put a perfume in there and go up and down the aisle and spray the theater. And for the first 5 minutes after they did the spraying, boy, you'd lean back and inhaling all this perfume. But all the movies were All Quiet on the Western Front, Roy Rogers, Tom Mix, Jack Holt. Those were the ones. And they had serials, The Perils of Pauline. You'd come each week, there'd be another sequence. And also in the big theaters like the Kenmore on Flatbush Avenue, you'd go and they'd give you dishes. If you bought a ticket, 25 cents a ticket, you got a dish. And people came to the dishes. Also, they had vaudeville in those days on the stage. Not burlesque, vaudeville. Tap dancers, singers, joke tellers, skits. And I used to love that, love it.
And I remember going to the Polo Grounds. That's the home of the enemy. And I'm sitting and I'm rooting for the Dodgers. And I'm wearing what we used to call in those years an ice cream suit, meaning it was white, a jacket and the pants, and a giant fan above me took his fountain pen. And the guy I'm with says, Al, what happened to your jacket? What? What is that? Look at all these black spots. Guy emptied it among 55,000 people. How am I going to find the guy? Guy emptied his pen on my ruined my jacket. I lost my ice cream suit. We used to call it that. Because in those years, Good Humor used to wear the white suit, the Good Humor. It used to be called ice cream suit. I remember that. He went to the home of the enemy. Horace Stoneham and the Giants in the Polo Ground. Look at this. What the hell is this? Where'd I get this from? I'm going to tell you a joke right now. Two old guys are sitting on a bench in Miami. Just looking out. One guy says to the other guy, are you from New York? He says, yeah. He says, gee, I'm from New York too. Oh, really? Yeah. What'd you do in New York? I had a business. Oh, yeah? Well, what happened to the business? Had a fire. Oh, gee, that's terrible. Fire. Huh. But what about you? What did you do in New York? Had a business too. Well, what happened? It was a flood. First guy says, well, how do you make a flood? Now that's funny.
They had the statue of Erasmus on the campus. So I wrote an article, the opening article for the yearbook. The statue speaks, and he said, I remember the idea of it, hold your character high, do this, do that. And then at the end, I wanted to close with some kind of a motto. And I didn't find any that I liked, besides most of them were so well known that I thought would be banal. So I wrote my own. I never forget it because it was meaningless. Remember that that at sundown, or at sunrise, I don't remember whichever, even a small man casts a long shadow. That's the way the article is. And everybody thought that was very, very profound, very profound. Didn't mean a damn thing. I just had to end with something. Well, that's, anybody who has that yearbook, I think it was 1938 or 1937 yearbook, that they'll remember that line because they've probably puzzled over it all these years.
Coney Island had different bays, and they were really, there was an ethnic breakdown in the bays. Bay 2 to Bay 7, Jewish. Bay 10 to Bay 15, Italian. You saw it, the hair. I mean, one bay was hairy, one bay wasn't. When I was 16, I would go to Bay 2 and Bay 3 and Bay 7 to meet Jewish girls. Obviously, the Jewish guys were coming to Bay 10 to meet Italian girls. That's what I guess the DMZ was Bay 7 to Bay 10. It was packed.
If you would like additional copies of New York the Way It Was, Brooklyn, call 1-800-847-7793. Please have your credit card ready.
The preceding program was brought to you by grants from Forest City Ratner Companies, dedicated to a growing Brooklyn, and Independent Savings Bank, 145 years of helping Brooklynites in their pursuit of happiness.